Hello everyone and welcome back to Fantasy Football Fix. My name's FPL Phillips and this is your Game Week 12 edition of Eddie versus the Algorithm. We're remembering it's a Tuesday evening deadline at 6 PM, so you make sure you get your team locked in by then for the midweek games where we will not be seeing Arsenal and Manchester City feature, of course. Last week in Game Week 11, the Algorithm actually beat me again. Jose Sarr in goal was a magnificent pick, amassing 14 points just from him. It was quite close in the other areas of the team where they looked quite similar, but Sarr made quite a lot of difference in goal. So let's see if the Algorithm can get another magnificent pick like that in its side for this upcoming game week. So without any further ado, let's get into having a look at how the Algorithm team is looking for Game Week 12. And without any messing, in goal for the Algorithm for Game Week 12 is going to be Robert Sanchez, who looks like a pretty good pick to go for, as do most goalkeepers who are going up against Nottingham Forest when we're considering the hopes of a clean sheet. And a lot of people at the moment might not have Sanchez in their sides. Brighton have gone through a bit of a tricky fixture run recently. They have got some tough fixtures coming up after Game Week 12 as well. So if you need a keeper right now, I probably wouldn't jump on Sanchez, but as far as a free hit goes and clean sheets go, he looks a very, very strong option indeed. And Brighton look like one of the best teams to target from a defensive and also an attacking perspective if we look at Game Week 12 individually in isolation. Moving into defence then, and we're going to see another Brighton asset already moving into the back line is going to be Lewis Dunk. And there has been a little bit of a conversation surrounding whether Dunk is the pick to go for or whether Webster, the other roughly 4.5 million defender from Brighton, could be the best pick to go for either. The underlying data, when we look over on the OptaStats tool of the Fantasy Football Fix website, looks very tight. Webster was slightly ahead, but Dunk had a good chance when I watched the Brentford-Brighton game that he could have easily scored from in that match and done some justice for his owners who brought him in, only for nothing to come for Lewis Dunk in terms of Game Week 11 for a points return. But Dunk's look pretty good. I would maybe go for him, but Webster has just got the edge for me from the expected assists is where he comes through and just gets ahead of Lewis Dunk. So if you're looking at goal threat, I think Dunk's probably the best one to go for, but Webster's looking pretty good from an expected assists, so I would go maybe for him. But Dunk and Webster, too tight to call really. It could go either way. There's really nothing in that to separate the two. And the same can kind of be said on the other side for Anderson against Mark Gay. So who you go for out of those two at Crystal Palace, I don't think matters too much either. If I would say if you can afford the extra and you're on a free hit, Anderson does look marginally the better option, the underlying data would suggest. And then finally, Kieran Trippier in the defensive line. Good clean sheet potential against Everton, and Newcastle have looked like a very solid defence as of late. Attacking as well, Trippier going forward on those set pieces, of course, and has looked very, very good from open play as well. So Trippier's one I'd be very confident with and would definitely be a lock on my free hit. I'd also be looking to transfer him in if you need a defender and don't own the Englishman already. In midfield then, we're looking at a midfield 5 this week with Mo Salah making his return to the Algorithm 11. He's going to be captain for Liverpool's trip against West Ham off the back of that winning goal against Manchester City in Game Week 11. Elsewhere in the midfield, we're seeing Trossard, Mount, Barnes and Zaha. So Mount, who scored 2 goals in Game Week 11, coming into the side. You would argue he got a little bit lucky with one of the goals coming from a Mings defensive error with that header. And then the other goal from a free kick that you won't see every week, I suppose, from players like Mount. Maybe James Ward-Prowse would say something about that. But generally, you're not going to see too many special free kicks like that every week of the season. So Mount has looked good. I'm not denying that at all. Maybe there might be a better option in the Chelsea midfield if you can afford a bit of an upgrade, but I do still really like the pick, and he's definitely one of the main men in that Chelsea side for a nice fixture, you would say, against Brentford. But they did look very good defensively, and Raya, especially in goal, looked very good for that Brentford side in Game Week 11. Barnes, Zaha and Trossard. I think Trossard's a really nice pick to go for. Would probably be my mid-price midfielder of choice over any of the other three in this side. So Mount, Barnes and Zaha. Barnes looks a really nice differential if you want to go for someone from Leicester. Maddison will be ruled out, which will be a big blow for Leicester in that game against Leeds. But Barnes still could be a pretty decent alternative and might be the man they have to turn to come through in that game against Leeds. Zaha's not been returning too many points as of late, but of course he's still got those penalties. He can return pretty much any game week when we don't want him to. Tends to be the times when he does end up returning, but against Wolves, you would back him to do okay. They've not been the worst defence, kept a clean sheet in game week 11, albeit against Nottingham Forest or Wolverhampton Wanderers. So Trossard would be my pick. I really like him, and I really like the midfield as a whole. I think it looks like a really strong midfield five. It's going to be tough to justify too many changes to that midfield. And then finally up front, we're seeing a front two of Harry Kane up against Man United, and then Darwin Núñez, which is probably the most surprising pick. Now, with Diogo Jota ruled out with what looks like a pretty serious injury in Game Week 11, that leaves a spot open in the front three where Darwin Núñez could potentially slot in. Now, with regards to playing Darwin Núñez out on the left and Firmino through the middle, Salah over on the right, I'm not too quite sure how Liverpool are going to line up, maybe even switching to a 4-4-2 with Salah wide, Darwin and Firmino through the middle. Let me know if you're a Liverpool fan how you're expecting the Reds to line up this week down in the comments. But Darwin could be a potential minutes risk is the only thing putting me off going for him. But looks like a pretty decent option when he's on the pitch. He's certainly getting the chances. It's just whether he can start looking a little bit more clinical and putting them away. But that is the starting 11 for this week. On the bench for this 60 predicted points team is going to be Solanke, Mark Gay, and then Castagna. So the other Crystal Palace defender that I mentioned is actually on the bench here. Castagna looks like a decent pick as well, but Leeds look pretty good against Arsenal when we look at attacking. Sinisterra could have had a few chances. They were quite unlucky with a few of the refereeing decisions as well, so I wouldn't be too hopeful of a Leicester clean sheet. Perhaps not the week to start Danny Ward over Nick Pope when Newcastle are going up against Everton, so wouldn't be too keen on starting Leicester defensive assets this week if you do own any and have different alternatives you can play on the bench, but many of us will have a lot of Arsenal or Man City assets and might not have too much of a choice for Game Week 11. Solanke against Southampton continues to impress. His underlying data isn't too great despite getting quite a lot of attacking returns from those underlying numbers. Suggests he's overperforming a bit at the moment, but still looks a nice budget option to go for. He's guaranteed those 90 minutes as well, which is always a positive. So now we need to look in and have a look at my team and what I would be changing this week to try and get one back against the algorithm and beat it in Game Week 12. I've kept Sanchez in goal. I've kept Trippier as well, but I have changed Dunk out for Webster. I mentioned that could really go either way. I've kept Anderson too for that little bit extra attacking threat over going for Gay. In midfield, I've changed Mount out for Sterling, so I've managed to do the upgrade there, and I've funded most of these upgrades in midfield by downgrading up front Darwin Núñez down to Callum Wilson, who I think could be a really, really nice pick this week. And with Isaac looking out up until the World Cup, Wilson's the only striker option they have got left. He did get hooked a little bit early in the game against Manchester United, which shows they're not too afraid to put another option on that's not an out-and-out forward when Newcastle are looking to defend. But Callum Wilson as a whole, looking like the main man, will be on penalties in that game against Everton, which I'm backing Newcastle to do well in. I've also gone for a little bit of an outside-the-box pick in Leon Bailey in midfield, who did look pretty impressive against Chelsea, and Aston Villa were quite unlucky to not get a goal, partly thanks to Kepa Arrizabalaga pulling off some absolute wonder saves, but also just got a little bit unlucky, you would argue, and Bailey looked like one of the star men in that game. A very cheap price point as well if you're looking for a budget option at the moment, and up against the worst defence in the league statistically in Fulham. And then I've gone with Heung-min Son as well, so doubled up with Harry Kane against Manchester United, which I admit is a little bit of a risk. But when Spurs do well against Manchester United, they tend to score 2 or more goals, and Son and Kane tend to have a field day. It's just a matter of getting the first goal past Manchester United, you do feel. And then it's whether the Manchester United can bounce back from that, or whether their defence crumbles like we've seen in previous years. I'm not so confident of it happening. No Maguire in the team now. It's Martinez and Varane at the back who look a lot more solid. But Son and Kane, I'm still backing. They're expensive assets for a reason, and I could afford them with no enough funds going towards players like Haaland or Kevin De Bruyne. So I've gone with this as my free hit side on the bench. I spent a little bit less just going with some budget options like Nico Williams, Totti, and then a 4.5 million forward just to fill out the bench. But I'm not expecting to need any of those guys to come in, which gives me a predicted points total of 56 for this week, keeping the captain's armband on Mohamed Salah. So that's going to wrap up this week's episode of Eddie versus the Algorithm. As always, let me know down below in the comments who do you think is coming out on top, be it Team Eddie or Team Algo for Game Week 12. A reminder to make sure your teams are locked in before the deadline, and I wish you the best of luck for Game Week 12. Thanks very much for tuning in, and goodbye.